Hello and welcome to this Unity lesson. This is a big one. In fact, we're going to split it into Part A and Part B because there's lots that's going on. What we're going to be doing in this lesson is creating a mini game in which we're going to throw coconuts at 3 targets, and if we get all of the targets down, if we hit them all within a certain amount of time, then we'll get a power cell reward, and we need that power cell in order to enter the outpost building that we set up in a previous lesson. So let me quickly show you where we're going to end up. So here I am on my island that I've made all pretty in the previous lessons. And you'll notice now next to my outpost building there's this shack. Let's do what we did in the previous lesson. I gather up my power cells, but lo and behold, there's one missing. I need one more to get into my shack, get into the outpost. So if I come over to this little shack here, if I step on this pad, I'll have the ability to shoot coconuts at these 3 targets. And you'll see that I get a little message when I step on the pad giving me a hint about what I should do. And I have a target also, so let's see if I can do this. I aim just right. I hit all 3 of the targets within a certain amount of time, and that released this power cell, and I can collect it, and then once I collect the power cell, at long last, I can enter into my outpost building. So there's a lot to do to get there. Let's start off with the first steps. Alright. First thing we're going to do to start our coconut throwing minigame is to create the coconut itself. So go up to the main menu and select Game Object, Create Other, and choose Sphere. Once you've created that sphere, you can zoom into it by selecting it in the hierarchy and then moving your mouse over the scene view and hitting the F key, and that will zoom you right in. With that sphere selected, let's rename the object coconut. And let's change the scale of the coconut to make it look a little more coconutty. We'll change the X to 0.5, we'll change the Y to 0.6, and we'll change the Z to 0.5. And you'll see that it gives us a somewhat elongated shape. Once we've got the shape set up the way we want it, let's add a texture to that coconut. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to actually create a new material that looks like a coconut, and then we're going to apply that material to this object. So here's how you can do that. In the project window, click on the Create drop-down menu item and choose Create Material. That will add a material to your project window, which you're going to rename Coconut Texture. Then once you've renamed it, open up your Book Assets folder in the project view and go to the Textures Child folder and look for the texture that's called Coconut Texture. And what we're going to do is, while we've got the coconut texture material that we just created selected, and so that we're viewing it in the inspector, we're going to drag the coconut texture file over onto the setting. So I'll drag it and drop it over there. And you'll see now in the little preview window what it's going to look like when it's applied to the object. So now that we have created the material that we want, we can apply it to our coconut object in the hierarchy simply by dragging it either directly up onto the object in the scene view or by dragging it over to the object in the hierarchy. Take your pick. But you can see once we've done that, now that texture has been applied to the coconut object in our scene. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to create a script that will work with the coconut when we actually put it into our game. And what we're going to do is have a script that will cause each coconut that gets thrown in the game to disappear from the game after 3 seconds. That will keep our game from filling to the brim with coconuts, which would look sort of cool, but can cause some performance problems. So let's create the script to do that now. In my project, I've started organizing the objects a bit to make it easier to know which objects are where. I've created a folder in my project window called scripts, and if I create a new script and I would like it to automatically be created inside that scripts folder, all I need to do is to select the scripts folder in the project view and then go and click create and JavaScript, and it will plop that script right down into my scripts folder. So create a new JavaScript into your scripts folder, and then rename that script tidy object. And once you've renamed it, double-click to open it in MonoDevelop. And then we're going to have a very short script, and the text for this script will be available on the course Blackboard site. So just to go to that Blackboard site and paste in this little hunk of script. Really all it's going to do is we're setting a variable of some time, seconds essentially, and which we're going to set to 3 by default. And then we've got a start function, which is just saying that it should destroy whatever game object this script is attached to after this amount of time that we've got set in this variable. So in our case, we'll attach the script to our coconut, and then after 3 seconds, after the coconut has appeared, after it's started in the game itself, it will destroy itself. So save that. Once you've got that script saved, come back into Unity, and then we're going to take that tidy object script and just drag it on over and attach it to our coconut. Okay. We're almost ready. We almost have our coconut ready to go. Because we're going to be throwing these coconuts, we need to have them respond to the physics of the world. They need to have respond to gravity, for example. So we need to add a rigid body component to our coconut object. So select the coconut in your hierarchy view and go up to Components, Physics, and choose Rigid Body. Alright, now our coconut is all set. So right now we've created a single coconut object in our scene. But the way our game is going to work is that we're going to have a script that's going to instantiate a coconut every time the player hits the fire button, which is basically in our case going to be the mouse left mouse click button. So we don't want a single coconut object in the scene. Instead, we need a prefab that we can instantiate. So we need to convert our coconut object into a prefab. And if you remember from previous lessons, you can convert an object into a prefab simply by dragging it from the hierarchy into the project window. Again, I've been organizing things a bit in my project window, so I've created a prefabs folder in my project window. So I'm going to drag my coconut object from the hierarchy and drop it over in that prefabs folder, and it will instantly convert it into a prefab. Once we've got that done, we don't even need the original coconut object that we've got in our scene. We can just delete it. And not to worry though, because we still have the coconut prefab sitting over in our project window, complete with the script that we attached to it. So we've got our coconut. The next thing we need to do is to create a launcher object. This is basically going to be an empty game object that's going to hold the script that gets called to throw the coconuts in our world. So let's create that now. Where this launcher object is going to be created is, well, it's going to be a child object of our main camera, which makes sense because we want the coconut to appear roughly where the main camera is, although not exactly at the origin of the main camera. So let's go ahead and do that now. Go up to Game Object on the menu and choose Create Empty. And over in the inspector, rename that empty game object Launcher. Then, in your hierarchy view, expand out your first-person controller object so that you see the main camera child object. And we're going to drag our launcher empty object onto that main camera so it becomes a child of the main camera object. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the transform, the position of our launcher, so that it is almost at the origins. The origin would be 0, 0, 0 of our main camera. But if we leave it at 0, 0, 0, when the player clicks to throw a coconut, it's going to sort of appear as if the coconut is coming out of the player's head, which is not exactly what we want. Instead, we're going to position that launcher object so that the coconut will appear to come as if the player has thrown it with her right hand. So we're going to move that position just a little bit by changing the X position to 1, and we'll change the Z position to 1 also. And we're going to change the rotation a little bit on the y-axis of the launcher as well. And what this is going to end up doing is we've just changed the position from which that coconut is going to get thrown off to the right a little bit. But if we don't change the rotation, the coconut is going to just shoot straight ahead. And what we'd like to have it do is start slightly off from the right-hand side, and then when it gets thrown, come in toward the center of our view a little bit. So to do that, let's change our rotation. We're going to have the X be 0, we're going to have the Z be 0, but we're going to change the Y-axis transformation to about 352. And you can play around with this a little bit until you get it to be set up just the way you like. So our empty launcher object is almost ready to go. There's one more thing we need to add to it, which is an audio source component. Once we get the game going, we're going to have a sound play when the player throws a coconut, a sort of whooshing sound. So in order for that to work, we need to have an audio source component on our launcher object. So with your launcher object selected in the hierarchy, go to Component, and Audio Source. And we don't need to set it here, we're going to end up setting it later on. Alright, so we have a launcher object. Now we need to create a script that we attach to that launcher so the player can actually then throw the coconut. So let's do that now. Going back into my project view, I'm going to select my scripts folder, and then I'm going to go into the Create drop-down menu and choose JavaScript. It will add a script into that scripts folder. And I'd like you to rename your script Coconut Thrower. All right. Once you've renamed the script Coconut Thrower, double-click to open it in MonoDevelop. And then from either from the book chapter where you'll find this script, or from the Blackboard site, I'll also have this script available. Paste in the following code. And I'll go through it quickly. We've got a variable for the sound that gets played when the player throws a coconut. We've got a variable that lets the script know which prefab object to throw. Remember, we created that coconut prefab, so we'll set that here. We've got a variable for how fast we want our throw to be. Right here I've got it set to 30, which I actually think is too fast, so I'm going to change it down to 20. If you make the throw speed too fast, the collision detection won't work well in Unity, and you may have your coconut just go through the wall of your shack rather than to be detected by the objects in the shack. So I'm going to slow it down a little bit. And then we've got a static variable that is going to default to not being able to throw a coconut. What we're going to do is set our game up so that the player can't throw coconuts anywhere they want on the island. Instead, they can only throw the coconut, as you saw in the early example I showed you at the beginning of this lesson. They can only throw the coconut when they're standing on a mat, a little platform right in front of the targets inside our coconut shack. And then we've got our main function is an update function, so every time the frame gets refreshed, it's going to check to see if the player is holding down the fire button, and also check if they're standing on that mat. And if both of those things are true, it will play the sound. It will then instantiate an instance of that coconut prefab. It'll give it a name. It'll apply a velocity to that coconut prefab in the forward direction at the speed that we set up in the throw speed. And then finally, the script will tell the coconut to ignore the player object itself, so it doesn't actually collide with the player object. It's unlikely to happen, but just in case, we're going to turn that off. And then we let the script know that it needs to have an audio source so it can play the sound. So once you've saved that script, close it up and come back into Unity. And now that we've got that script created, we need to attach it to our launcher object. So just click on it and select it in your project window and drag it over and drop it on your launcher object. Now if I click on that launcher object and look over in the inspector, you'll see that there are a couple things we need to set. And I didn't do a good job saving mine, so it reset the throw speed to 30, so I'm going to slow mine down to 20. And I need to tell the script which sound to use, so I'm going to go into my Book Assets folder, go down to the Sounds Child folder, and then find the Coconut Throw audio clip and set that. And then I need to let the script know which prefab to use, so we're going to open up the prefabs folder in my project window, and I'm going to find my coconut prefab and drag that up over there. So far, so good. Now, if we actually were to test this, we're not going to be able to throw the coconut because our can throw variable is set to false, so it's not going to become true until we actually put the coconut shack in there and then create a trigger for the player to step on. So let's do both of those things now. Let's add our coconut shack to our scene. And I'm going to suggest that you put your coconut shack right next to the outpost building so that to the player it makes sense that these two objects go together in terms of actions that the player should perform inside the virtual world. So in your project window, go into your Book Assets folder and open the Models folder, and then click on the model called Coconut Shy. And we're going to check a couple of settings over in the inspector. First is the scale factor. We want it to be a size that matches what we've got in terms of the outpost and the island itself. So set your scale factor to 1. And also we need to generate colliders for our coconut shack so that the coconuts will bounce off the walls. So make sure that you have enabled the Generate Colliders checkbox. And then last but not least, in order for these changes to take effect, you have to make sure to hit the Apply button in the inspector. Once you've done all that, you can drag your coconut shy model out into your scene and then position it as you like, and position it and rotate it if you like, so that it shows up roughly next to your outpost building. For now, I'll just leave mine at 0, 0, 0 for its rotation. And I'll just double check to make sure that it's roughly even with the ground here. That looks pretty good. Alright, that position looks okay. So I've got my coconut shack in there, Now I need to create a script that's going to turn on the ability to throw the coconuts. So let's go ahead and do that now. Just like we do every time we create a new script, if you're being organized, in your project view, click on your scripts folder and then choose Create JavaScript. That's going to throw a new JavaScript file into your scripts folder. And I want you to rename that script Throw Trigger. I've already created mine, so here's my Throw Trigger script. I'm going to double click to open it up in MonoDevelop, and I'm going to paste in this code that's up on the Blackboard site, so I'll go through this really quickly. I've got a couple of public variables. Crosshair is going to be a GUI texture. That's going to be the green target texture we show on the screen. And then text hints is GUI text. That's going to be the hint text that we're going to show when the player steps onto the little trigger mat. Then we've got an onTriggerEnter function and an onTriggerExit function. What's happening in here is it's when the player steps onto that the trigger that we're going to place onto the mat, it's going to check first of all whether the thing that's just collided with the trigger on the mat is named player, and since we've named our first-person controller player, or we've tagged it player, then we should be in good shape. And if that's the case, it's going to change the canThrow static variable that was on our coconut thrower script to true, and it's going to enable the GUI texture so that it can be seen on the screen. And then it's going to check whether or not the player has already won the game. And if they haven't won the game, it's going to show a hint. And that's what this message is here. It's just going to tell the text hints GUI text to display a message. And then when the player steps off of the mat and they are no longer colliding with the trigger, again, it's going to check whether or not the thing that's no longer colliding with it is the player. And if so, it's going to disable the ability to throw the coconut, and it's going to hide that crosshair. Once you've got all of that typed in and saved, then you can close up your script and come back into Unity. Now, right now we've got our coconut shack in here, but we don't yet have a trigger collider attached to this mat object so that we can attach the script to that mat object and have it react to the to the player stepping on it. So let's do that now. So over in your hierarchy view, go to the coconut shy object and expand it out, and go to the mat child object and select it. And we need to add a collider to that. So we're going to go up to Component, Physics, and choose Box Collider. Now when you do that, you remember when we brought the Coconut Shack object into our scene, we chose on the import settings to generate colliders. And so there's a mesh collider attached to the entire object, including its child objects. And when we reach this point and we say that we want to add a box collider to the mat, we need to make a decision whether we're going to add a new box collider in addition to the mesh colliders we already have, or are we going to replace the existing mesh collider with the box collider? We do not want to replace the existing one. If we do that, we'll have just that box collider, but the rest of the shack won't have any colliders attached to it, so the player will be able to walk right through it. Instead, we want to add a box collider to the existing mesh collider, so we'll click on Add. Once we've done that, you'll see that it's created a little box collider just in perfectly matched to the size of our little mat here. What we need to do is to resize that box collider so that it's roughly the height of the first player object, so that we have something to collide with. To do that, come up to your little hand tool on the upper left hand side and click on it, and then hold down the Shift key on your keyboard. And when you do that, you'll see that you can see these little squares on the side and the top of the box collider. And if you click and hold on the top little box and then drag up, you can increase the size of that box collider. And that looks like about the right height there. Now that we've got our box collider set up as a trigger, we can go ahead and add that trigger, the throw trigger script onto our mat object by simply choosing the throw trigger script from the project window and dragging and dropping it over onto our mat child object. Now if you look in the inspector, it's asking for that GUI texture crosshair and for the text hints. We haven't actually created those yet, but let's go ahead and give this a try and see if we can throw our coconuts. So here I am, and you'll see here I can't throw anything. Let's go over to our coconut shack, step on our little mat, and you'll see that I get an error because I haven't assigned the GUI texture yet. But here I am, I can throw lots of coconuts, and you'll see that after 3 seconds those coconuts disappear from the scene. And because I'm standing on this mat, I can throw the coconuts any direction. You know, it's not. You can see if I can hit my little shack over here. Oh, almost. Okay, so we've got that set up. We still need to show our GUI texture, the target texture, and we need to show our hints. So we'll do that next.